There are moments in life when one quiet second rewrites everything that came before. For Bernard Thompson, that moment arrived on a late Tuesday evening outside a private medical complex in Plano, Texas, when he stopped pushing his mop cart and watched a young woman struggle to stand. The scene was ordinary. The fluorescent lights hummed above, the parking lot stretched empty and cold. But something was wrong. For Cindy Lawson, the two-year-old daughter who had spent nearly 9 years learning to hide her pain behind practiced smiles, that moment came as a whisper. It was the strange absence of agony when she shifted her weight, a sensation so foreign she froze in place, terrified it might vanish. No cameras, no celebration, just a trembling breath, and the impossible realization that someone finally saw what everyone else had missed. But before the miracle, there had been devastation. There had been millions of dollars spent chasing hope. There had been sleepless nights when a father wondered whether all his power meant nothing against his daughter's suffering. This is the story of a widowed janitor surviving on the margins, of a billionaire haunted by helplessness, and of a brave young woman who had been told to accept that this was as good as it gets. This is the story of how a single father with calloused hands accomplished something that wealth, prestige, and cutting-edge technology could never deliver. And it all began with one simple observation. Your brace is not working with you, it is fighting you. But before that sentence was ever spoken, before Bernard Thompson became the janitor who saw what millions of dollars missed, let me tell you about a man the world had stopped noticing. Bernard was not always a single father working night shifts in an empty medical building. When he was younger, he dreamed of becoming an industrial engineer, the kind of man who could look at complex systems and understand exactly where stress turned into failure. He studied at a small community college in Wichita Falls, filling notebooks with diagrams of load distribution, mechanical balance, the hidden mathematics of how things break and how they hold. He and his wife Teresa would sit together at their tiny kitchen table, sketching blueprints for the future they were building together, a future that felt solid and certain. But when Teresa was hit by a drunk driver on a highway outside Amarillo, every plan shattered in an instant. The collision left her paralyzed from the waist down, her spine fractured in 3 places, her body suddenly foreign to her. Bernard was 24 years old. He dropped out of school 3 credits before graduation and became her full-time caregiver. Every night while she slept, he studied everything he could find about mobility aids, pressure distribution, assistive devices. Not because he believed he could fix her, but because he needed to understand why her pain never stopped, even when the doctors said it should. Teresa lived for 3 more years, each one harder than the last. On the night she died, Bernard sat in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat, holding her hand as her breathing slowed and finally stopped. Her last words to him were quiet, barely a whisper. "Promise me you will not stop learning. Promise me you will help someone the way you tried to help me." From that day forward, Bernard carried that promise like a weight he could never set down. He took the only job he could find that paid enough to raise their infant son Caleb alone, night janitorial work at medical facilities across North Texas. But every evening after Caleb fell asleep, Bernard returned to his books, his notebooks, his obsessive study of biomechanics and human movement. He had no degree, no credentials, no reason to believe anyone would ever listen to him, but he kept the promise anyway. That small apartment near Lake Louisville became a silent laboratory. Bernard studied how the human body balanced weight, how joints bore stress, how mechanical systems either worked with the body or fought against it. His wife was gone. His future was gone. And Bernard lived every day knowing he had not been able to save the person he loved most. Because somewhere deep in his heart, Bernard believed that one day, when the chance appeared, he would finally keep the promise he made to Teresa. And it was from that promise, from those long, silent nights surrounded by diagrams and borrowed textbooks, that Bernard's fate quietly began to turn. Not far away, also in Texas, also carrying a wound that refused to heal, there lived a father whose world stood in complete contrast to Bernard's. Mark Lawson was not an ordinary father. He was the founder and CEO of Lawson Logistics and Real Estate, a billion-dollar empire built on precision, control, and the belief that every problem had a solution if you were willing to pay for it. Mark's name appeared in Forbes, at private investment summits, and on the donor walls of elite medical institutions across 3 states. He was the embodiment of power, wealth, and influence, but all that success could not erase one winter afternoon 9 years earlier. It was a clear December day in Aspen, Colorado. The snow was perfect, the slopes immaculate, the mountain resort buzzing with the kind of effortless luxury Mark had worked his entire life to provide for his family. Cindy, then only 13 years old, was an intermediate skier, confident but not reckless. Mark was in a business meeting at the lodge, phone in hand, managing a deal worth $30 million. "Cindy, can I go down the advanced trail?" Her bright voice called out across the snow. Mark waved without looking up. "Stay on the blue runs, sweetheart. I will meet you at the bottom in 20 minutes. But he did not truly see her. He was reading an email. That afternoon, Cindy convinced herself the trail was not that difficult. She veered off course, lost control on an icy patch, and crashed violently into a tree line at 40 miles per hour. The impact shattered her left femur and caused a rare spinal nerve injury that left her legs functional but trapped in constant, searing pain. The doctors called it chronic neuropathic pain syndrome, a condition where the nervous system misfires endlessly, turning every step into agony. Mark blamed himself every single day. He threw money at the problem. Millions of dollars on experimental treatments, robotic braces designed in Silicon Valley, rehabilitation centers in Boston and Zurich. Cindy tried them all. She smiled through every failure, told her father she was fine, that the pain was manageable, but Mark knew better. He saw it in the way she gripped the armrests when she stood, the way her jaw tightened when she thought no one was watching. And then, one Tuesday evening, their car broke down outside a private sports medicine facility in Plano. The mechanic was delayed, the building was nearly empty, and Mark stood beside his daughter in a parking lot bathed in cold, fluorescent light, watching her struggle to stand without crying. That was when Bernard Thompson walked past, mop cart rattling softly behind him. He should have kept walking, but he stopped, and he looked at Cindy the way no one else ever had, not at her face, not at her brace, but at the way her body fought against itself with every movement. Then Bernard spoke. "Your brace is not working with you. It is fighting you." Mark turned sharply, his voice edged with exhaustion and barely concealed anger. "And who exactly are you?" The janitor who just challenged a billion-dollar system stood perfectly still, his hands rough and scarred, his uniform faded from years of washing, but his eyes were steady. "I am someone who has spent a very long time learning how things break," Bernard said quietly, "and I think I know why your daughter is still in pain." That sentence, spoken in a parking lot under harsh white lights by a man nobody had ever paid attention to, was the beginning of everything that came next. Bernard Thompson was born in a small town outside Denton, Texas, the kind of place where people worked with their hands and measured success not in dollars, but in whether you kept your word. His father was a maintenance worker at a grain elevator. His mother cleaned houses for families who never learned her first name. Bernard grew up understanding that the world was not built for people like him, but that did not mean he had to accept it quietly. When he graduated high school, Bernard enrolled at Vernon College in Wichita Falls with a single goal: to become an industrial maintenance engineer. Not because he wanted fame or wealth, but because he wanted stability. He wanted to be the kind of man who could fix things, who could look at a broken system and understand exactly where it failed and why. His professors noticed his gift for seeing patterns others missed. The way he could study a diagram of load distribution and immediately identify the weak points, the places where stress would eventually turn into catastrophe. It was during his second year that he met Teresa, a waitress at a diner near campus who had a laugh that made the entire room feel warmer. They married 6 months later in a courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses and a bouquet of gas station flowers. Teresa worked double shifts while Bernard studied. They saved every dollar, planned every detail of the future they were building together. They were 23 years old and convinced that hard work was enough to protect them from the cruelty of chance. Then came the night that shattered everything. Teresa was driving home from her shift on a 2-lane highway outside Amarillo when a drunk driver crossed the center line at 70 miles per hour. The collision crushed her spine in 3 places. Severed nerves that could never be repaired left her paralyzed from the waist down. Bernard got the call at 2 in the morning. He drove through the darkness with his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the wheel. The doctors explained her condition in cold clinical terms: permanent paralysis, chronic pain, a lifetime of adaptive equipment, and physical therapy. Bernard nodded, took notes, asked questions no one expected him to understand. Then he went home, dropped out of college 3 credits before graduation, and became Teresa's full-time caregiver. Every night after she fell asleep, Bernard opened textbooks on biomechanics, watched videos on mobility aids, studied the engineering of wheelchairs and braces and pressure relief systems. He was not trying to cure her. He knew that was impossible. But he needed to understand why her pain never stopped, even when it should have. He needed to know why the $20,000 wheelchair left sores on her hips, why the custom leg braces caused more agony than relief, why every solution the medical system offered seemed designed by people who had never actually lived inside a broken body. Teresa survived 3 years. Each one was harder than the last, her body betraying her in new ways, the pain spreading like fire through nerves that no longer made sense. Bernard spent those years learning everything he could, not because it would save her, but because it was the only way he knew how to love her when love was not enough. On the night she died, the hospital room smelled like disinfectant and defeat. Bernard held her hand as her breathing slowed, as the machines around them beeped their steady countdown. Her final words came as a whisper, barely audible over the hum of medical equipment. "Promise me you will not stop learning. Promise me you will help someone the way you tried to help me." Bernard made that promise. Then he buried his wife, took custody of their infant son Caleb, and found the only job that would pay enough to survive: night janitorial work at medical facilities across North Texas. But he never stopped studying. Every evening after Caleb fell asleep, Bernard returned to his notebooks, his diagrams, his obsessive cataloging of how bodies moved and where they failed. He told himself that if he could not save Teresa, he would at least understand why. And maybe, someday, that knowledge would matter. He had no idea how soon that day would come. Cindy Lawson was 13 years old when her life split into before and after. The accident happened on a perfect December afternoon in Aspen, Colorado, on a slope she had skied a dozen times before. She misjudged a turn, hit an icy patch, and crashed into the tree line at a speed that shattered her left femur and caused a rare spinal nerve injury. The doctors called it chronic neuropathic pain syndrome, a condition where damaged nerves misfire endlessly, turning every movement into agony, even though her legs still functioned. She could walk, but every step felt like her body was tearing itself apart from the inside. Mark Lawson responded the only way he knew how. He threw money at the problem. Within 6 months, Cindy had been seen by the top orthopedic specialists in New York, neurologists at Stanford, pain management experts in Boston. They ran tests, adjusted medications, proposed experimental treatments that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime. Nothing worked. The pain never stopped. It only learned new ways to announce itself. When Cindy turned 16, Mark commissioned a custom leg brace from a biomechanics lab in Palo Alto, the kind of place where engineers designed prosthetics for Olympic athletes and military veterans. The brace cost $240,000. It was embedded with motion sensors, pressure regulators, and microprocessors that adjusted support in real time. The designers called it a marvel of modern engineering. Cindy called it her beautiful prison. The brace allowed her to walk, but it did not take away the pain. If anything, the pain grew worse, sharper, more unpredictable. But Cindy learned to hide it. She smiled when her father asked how she felt. She insisted the brace was helping. She refused to let him see her cry. Because Cindy understood something that terrified her, her father had already sacrificed so much trying to fix her. If she admitted the truth, that all his money and effort had failed, it would break him. Mark knew she was lying. He saw it in the way her hands trembled when she stood, the way her breath caught when she thought no one was watching. But he did not know how to ask her to stop protecting him, so instead he kept searching for answers, kept writing checks, kept believing that somewhere in the world there was a solution he had not yet found. That Tuesday evening, when their car broke down outside the medical complex in Plano, Mark stood beside his daughter in the parking lot and watched her struggle. Cindy was gripping the side of the SUV, her legs locked in the expensive brace, her face carefully neutral. Mark felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle over him like a fog. That was when Bernard Thompson walked past, his mop cart rattling softly against the pavement. He should have kept walking, but something made him stop. He stood there for a long moment, not staring at Cindy, but observing her, the way a mechanic studies an engine that is not running right. Bernard watched her take 3 steps. He counted each one, noted the way her hips rotated too far inward, the way her knees locked too early, the way her entire body was compensating for something that should have been supporting her. He saw the design flaw immediately. The brace was forcing her legs into an unnatural alignment, distributing weight in a way that worked against her body instead of with it. The engineers had built something technically perfect, but biomechanically wrong. Cindy noticed him watching. She met his eyes, expecting pity or curiosity, but instead she saw something different: recognition, the look of someone who understood exactly what he was seeing. She spoke before she could stop herself, her voice quiet but direct. "What do you see that they did not?" Bernard hesitated. He was a janitor. He had no credentials, no authority to challenge a $200,000 medical device designed by people with degrees he would never earn. But he thought about Teresa, about the promise he made, about all those years of studying in silence while the world ignored him. He looked at Cindy, then at Mark, then back at the brace. "Your weight is landing wrong," Bernard said carefully. "The brace is locking your knees too early and pushing all the stress into your hips and spine. It is not working with your body. It is fighting it." Mark's face hardened, a mixture of desperation and skepticism. "And you think you can fix what a team of Stanford engineers could not?" Bernard did not answer immediately. He looked at Cindy again, saw the hope flickering in her eyes despite her fear, and made a decision that would change all 3 of their lives. "I would like to try," he said quietly. Cindy spoke before her father could refuse. "Then try." Bernard asked for 20 minutes and a set of basic tools from the maintenance closet. Mark stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, watching this janitor kneel beside his daughter with a socket wrench and a flashlight. Every instinct told him to stop this, to call the driver, to leave before something went wrong. But Cindy had already made her choice, and Mark had learned years ago that his daughter was braver than he would ever be. Bernard worked carefully, his hands steady despite the pressure. He loosened the tension bolts at the knee joints, adjusted the angle of the lower supports, shifted the weight distribution points closer to Cindy's hips. It was a small modification, barely noticeable to anyone watching, but Bernard knew that in systems this complex, millimeters mattered. He explained each adjustment in quiet detail, not to impress them, but to make sure Cindy understood what he was trying to do. When he finished, he stood slowly and met Cindy's eyes. "This might not work," he said honestly. "And if it hurts more, we stop immediately." Cindy nodded, her face calm but her hands trembling slightly. "I understand." Mark moved closer, positioning himself beside his daughter in case she fell. His heart was hammering so hard, he could hear it in his ears. "This is insane," he thought, but he did not say it out loud. Because the truth was, he had run out of sane options years ago. Cindy took a breath, gripped her father's arm, and stood. For 3 seconds, everything seemed fine. The brace held, her legs supported her weight. Her face showed concentration, but not pain. She released her father's arm and took one step forward. Then, another. Mark felt something dangerous rising in his chest. Something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Then Cindy took a third step, and her left ankle buckled inward with a sickening twist. She collapsed forward, her knees slamming into the pavement, her hands scraping against asphalt as she tried to catch herself. The brace had shifted wrong. The joint had locked at the wrong angle, and the pressure had forced her ankle to bend in a way it was never meant to move. Blood appeared immediately, spreading across the pale skin of her shin where the metal edge of the brace had torn through. Cindy gasped, not screaming but struggling to breathe through the shock and pain. Mark dropped beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to assess the damage, tried to figure out what had just gone catastrophically wrong. Mark's voice, when it came, was cold and lethal. "What did you do?" He looked up at Bernard with fury that could have burned through steel. "What the hell did you do to my daughter?" Bernard stood frozen, his tools still in his hands, his mind racing through the modification, trying to understand where he had miscalculated. Security guards were already moving toward them, radios crackling, voices sharp with authority. One of them grabbed Bernard's arm, firm but not violent. "Sir, you need to come with us right now." Mark was helping Cindy to her feet, his arm around her waist, his voice low and soothing as he spoke to her. But when he looked back at Bernard, his expression was pure devastation turned to rage. "If you ever come near my daughter again, I will destroy you." Bernard let the security guards escort him away, his legs moving automatically, while his mind replayed the moment of failure over and over. He had been so certain, so sure he understood the problem. But he had been wrong, and now Cindy was bleeding, and Mark Lawson looked at him like he was a monster. They walked him to the edge of the property, to the border between the medical complex and the street, and told him he was no longer welcome on the premises. Bernard stood under the cold parking lot lights, still holding his tools, still trying to understand what he had missed. But all he could see was Teresa, her body failing despite everything he tried, her pain increasing no matter how much he studied, her final breath slipping away while he held her hand and knew he had not been enough. He had promised her he would help someone. Instead, he had made everything worse. Bernard walked to his car, climbed inside, and sat in the darkness wondering if he had just caused permanent damage to a young woman who had already suffered more than anyone should have to bear. He believed he had. The letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by courier to the apartment Bernard shared with his son near Lake Louisville. It was printed on heavy legal letterwork from a firm in downtown Dallas, whose name took up 4 lines of the header. The language was precise and cold. Bernard Thompson was hereby notified that any further contact with the Lawson family would result in immediate legal action, including but not limited to charges of negligent harm, practicing medicine without a license, and harassment. He was permanently banned from the medical complex property. Any violation would involve law enforcement. Bernard read it twice, then set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for an hour. The hospital administration sent their own letter the following day. Due to an incident involving unauthorized interaction with a patient, Bernard's janitorial contract was under review. He was suspended from 3 facilities pending investigation. The email was professional, bureaucratic, and devastating. Bernard had worked at those buildings for 6 years. They were his primary income, and now they were gone. Then the online rumors started. Someone had recorded part of the incident on their phone, a blurry video showing Cindy collapsing, blood on the pavement, security escorting Bernard away. It spread through local community pages, with captions like, "Janitor injures, Billionaire's Daughter, and Unqualified Man causes harm at medical facility." The comments were vicious, people who knew nothing about him deciding he was reckless, dangerous, delusional. Bernard stopped reading after the first dozen. But the damage was done. He began selling his tools, the socket sets, and precision instruments he had collected over years, the equipment he used for his late-night projects. He sold them online for half their value, needing the money, needing to erase the evidence of his foolish belief that he could help anyone. He considered quitting janitorial work entirely, finding something else, anything that did not involve medical buildings or the crushing weight of his own failure. But he had no other skills that paid enough to support Caleb. So he kept showing up to the one facility that had not yet banned him, moving through hallways like a ghost. Caleb noticed. His son was 8 years old, perceptive in the way children are when they have learned to read silence. He stopped asking his father about his day, stopped talking about school, just watched Bernard with worried eyes across the dinner table. One evening, Caleb found Bernard sitting on the apartment balcony, staring out at the lake. The sun was setting, the water reflecting orange and gold, and Bernard looked like a man who had forgotten how to move. Caleb sat beside him, his small legs dangling over the edge of the chair. "Dad, are you okay?" Bernard did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "I hurt someone, Caleb. I thought I could help, but I made everything worse." Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he asked the question Bernard had been avoiding. "Is this about the lady you tried to help? The one who fell?" Bernard nodded. "Did you mean to hurt her?" "No," Bernard whispered. "I would never." Caleb looked at his father with the kind of clarity that only children possess, the ability to see past complexity to simple truth. "Then you did not hurt her, Dad. You tried to help her. That is different." Bernard felt something crack open inside his chest. "It is not different, Caleb. I failed. I do not have the degrees or the training or the right to think I know better than doctors." "But you helped, Mom," Caleb said quietly. "You made her hurt less, even when the doctors could not. I remember you staying up all night trying to fix her chair so it did not make her cry. You did not stop trying even when it was hard." Bernard closed his eyes, the memory of Teresa flooding back with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. Caleb's voice came softer now, almost a whisper. Then, "Do not stop now." Those 4 words hung in the air between them. Bernard looked at his son, at this small person who believed in him even when he had stopped believing in himself, and something shifted. Not hope, not yet, but the faint possibility that maybe he had not been wrong about everything. Maybe he had just been wrong about the execution. Bernard broke then, the tears coming hot and sudden, his shoulders shaking as 8 years of grief and guilt and exhaustion finally found their way out. Caleb wrapped his arms around his father and held on tight, saying nothing, just being present in the way that mattered most. Later that night, after Caleb had fallen asleep, Bernard walked to the closet and pulled out the notebook he had been avoiding for days. It was filled with years of diagrams, calculations, observations about movement and weight and balance. He opened it to a blank page, picked up a pencil, and began to draw. He did not know if he could fix what he had broken. But Caleb was right about one thing. He could not stop now. Bernard spent the next 4 nights doing what he should have done from the beginning. Not adjusting someone else's design, but understanding why every design before it had failed. He filled page after page with sketches of human anatomy, diagrams of weight distribution, calculations of stress points and load bearing. He watched videos of people walking, running, standing, and studying the way healthy bodies moved, with an efficiency that seemed effortless, but was actually the result of millions of years of evolution. The problem revealed itself slowly, then all at once. Every brace Cindy had ever worn, including the one Bernard had tried to modify, was designed with the same fundamental assumption that the knees were the primary load-bearing joint. The engineers had built systems that stabilized and supported the knee, using sensors and actuators to control how the joint moved. It was logical, it was sophisticated, and it was completely wrong. Bernard sat up at 2 a.m, his notebook open in front of him, and spoke out loud to the empty apartment. The knees are not the foundation. The hips are everything. The human body does not balance at the knees, it balances at the hips. The hips carry the weight, distribute the load, and control the entire chain of movement that flows down through the legs. When you force the knees to do the work the hips should be doing, you create stress that radiates upward into the spine and downward into the ankles. You turn the body into a machine fighting itself. That was why Cindy's pain never stopped. Every brace had been solving the wrong problem. Bernard started over from scratch. He sketched a design that centered weight at the hips, using flexible support structures that moved with the body instead of controlling it. He needed materials he did not have and could not afford, so he improvised. He borrowed parts from old orthopedic equipment he found at second-hand medical supply stores, salvaged aluminum bracing from a junkyard, used hinges and joints designed for industrial applications but light enough to wear. He tested each piece on himself, strapping makeshift braces to his own legs and walking circles around the apartment. The first version cut into his thighs and left bruises that lasted for days. The second version was too heavy, throwing off his balance and making every step feel like he was dragging weights. The third version locked up completely after 10 minutes, the joints seizing from friction he had not accounted for. Caleb watched from the couch, doing his homework in silence, occasionally bringing his father water or a sandwich he would not eat. The boy never asked what his father was doing. He just stayed close, a quiet presence that reminded Bernard why failure was not an option. By the 5th night, Bernard thought he had it. The design was elegant in its simplicity, a curved support structure that wrapped around the hips and upper thighs, distributing weight naturally and allowing the knees to move freely instead of bearing the load. The materials were crude, salvaged, and improvised, but the engineering was sound. Bernard tested it on himself one final time, walking back and forth across the apartment while Caleb watched with worried eyes. It held, it moved correctly, it felt right. But Bernard knew that his body was healthy. His nerves functioned properly, and he could not truly know if this would work for someone whose pain came from a place he could only study, but never fully understand. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Bernard sat at the kitchen table and stared at his phone. He had been banned from contacting the Lawson family, threatened with legal action, humiliated, and dismissed. Every rational part of his mind told him to stop, to let this go, to accept that some things were beyond his ability to fix. But he thought about Teresa's final words, about Caleb's quiet faith, about the look in Cindy's eyes when she had asked him what he saw that others had not. He thought about the promise he made, and the fact that he had spent 8 years preparing for a moment he did not know was coming. Bernard opened his messages, found Mark Lawson's number that had been stored in his phone from that first night, and began typing. He wrote 3 drafts, deleted all of them, and finally settled on something simple and direct. I know you told me to stay away. I know I have no right to ask this, but I think I understand what went wrong. I rebuilt everything from scratch. If you give me one more chance, I believe I can help your daughter. If I am wrong again, I will disappear and never contact you again. But if I am right, Cindy could walk without pain. The choice is yours. Bernard stared at the message for 5 full minutes. Then he hit send. Mark Lawson did not respond to Bernard's message for 3 days. When the reply finally came, it was brief and cold. One chance. Tomorrow evening. Same location. If you fail, I will pursue every legal option available. Bernard read the message, showed it to Caleb, and quietly began gathering his tools. What he did not expect was the presence of Dr. Elaine Rutherford. She was a visiting rehabilitation specialist from Cleveland Clinic in Texas for a conference, and Mark had asked her to observe as a neutral medical authority. When Bernard arrived at the medical complex parking lot just after sunset, Dr. Rutherford was already there, standing beside Mark, with her arms crossed and her expression skeptical. She looked at Bernard, then at the crude brace he was carrying, then back at Bernard. Mr. Lawson tells me you believe you have solved a problem that has stumped some of the best biomechanical engineers in the country. Is that correct? Bernard met her eyes steadily. I believe I understand why the previous designs failed, yes. Dr. Rutherford's tone was professional, but laced with doubt. And your credentials? I do not have any, Bernard said simply. But I have spent 8 years studying how bodies move and where they break. That has to count for something. Cindy stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Her ankle was still bandaged from the previous attempt, her expression guarded but determined. I want to try. Mark moved closer to his daughter, his voice low and strained. Cindy, if this goes wrong again, I do not know if I can watch you go through that pain one more time. Cindy looked at her father with the kind of exhausted courage that comes from years of surviving. Dad, I have been in pain every day for 9 years. If there is even a chance this works, I have to take it. Mark's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Dr. Rutherford remained silent, her eyes fixed on the brace Bernard was assembling with careful precision. Bernard worked slowly, explaining each piece as he fitted it to Cindy's legs. The support center's at the hips, not the knees. The joints move with you instead of controlling you. The weight distributes naturally the way your body was designed to carry it. He checked every connection twice, his hands steady, despite the pressure crushing down on him from all sides. When he finished, he stepped back and looked at Cindy. If this hurts at all, even a little, we stop immediately. Cindy nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the SUV. Mark positioned himself beside her, ready to catch her if she fell. Dr. Rutherford stood a few feet away, watching with clinical detachment. And Caleb, who had quietly followed his father, stood near the building entrance, his small face serious and hopeful. Cindy stood slowly, transferring her weight from the car to her legs. She froze, her eyes going wide, her breath catching in her throat. Everyone tensed, waiting for the collapse, the blood, the failure, but it did not come. Cindy's voice was barely a whisper. There is no pain. Mark's hand went to his mouth. Dr. Rutherford leaned forward slightly, her skepticism shifting to attention. Cindy took one step, then stopped, as if afraid the ground would betray her. The brace held, the joints moved smoothly, and her face showed concentration, but not agony. She took another step, then another. Her breathing was uneven, not from pain but from disbelief. Then her voice broke, raw and trembling with emotion. Dad, it does not hurt. Mark Lawson, The billionaire, who had spent nearly a decade trying to buy his daughter's freedom from pain, collapsed emotionally. He did not fall, but his knees buckled slightly, his hand reaching for the SUV to steady himself. Tears poured down his face as he watched Cindy take 4 more steps. 5, 6, her movements growing more confident with each one. Bernard stood perfectly still, watching the miracle he had promised Teresa finally unfold in front of him. Tears streamed down his face, silent and uncontrolled, years of grief and guilt and desperate hope releasing all at once. He had kept his promise. He had finally kept his promise. Caleb walked over to his father and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You did it, Dad." Dr. Rutherford approached Cindy, asking her to walk again, to turn, to describe what she was feeling. Cindy did, her voice steady now, explaining that for the first time in 9 years she could feel the ground beneath her feet without her body screaming in protest. Dr. Rutherford looked at Bernard for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "I have never seen anyone solve this without a laboratory, a team, and years of testing. What you just did should not be possible." Bernard wiped his eyes, his voice hoarse. "I had good teachers." No one noticed the woman standing near the building entrance, her phone held up, recording everything. The video appeared online within hours. It was shaky, filmed from a distance, but the moment was unmistakable. A young woman walking without pain for the first time in 9 years. A billionaire father breaking down in tears, and a janitor standing quietly in the background, holding tools that looked like they came from a scrapyard. The caption read simply, "Sometimes the answer is not money. Sometimes it is just paying attention." By morning, the video had been viewed 3 million times. By the end of the week, it had crossed 20 million. The internet did what the internet does best. It turned a private miracle into a public battleground. The medical industry responded swiftly and defensively. Orthopedic engineers published statements questioning the safety of unregulated modifications. Biomechanics experts warned about the dangers of untrained individuals attempting complex medical interventions. A spokesperson from the company that designed Cindy's original brace issued a press release emphasizing that their device had been rigorously tested and approved by regulatory agencies, implying that Bernard's design was reckless by comparison. Online debates erupted across social media platforms. Some people celebrated Bernard as proof that credentials were not the same as competence, that sometimes outsiders see what experts miss, because they are not constrained by institutional assumptions. Others argued he was dangerous, that his success was luck rather than skill, and that celebrating him would encourage other unqualified people to attempt medical interventions that could cause serious harm. The controversy reached its peak when a popular medical podcast dedicated an entire episode to the incident, titled "When Janitors Play Doctor, Consequences, and Ethics." The hosts were measured but critical, arguing that while Bernard's intentions were good, the precedent was troubling. Then Mark Lawson spoke publicly. He did not issue a statement through a publicist or release a carefully worded press release. Instead, he sat for an interview with a major news network and spoke as a father, not a billionaire. "I spent 10 years and tens of millions of dollars trying to help my daughter," Mark said, his voice steady but emotional. "The best medical minds in the world tried and failed. Bernard Thompson succeeded because he did something no one else did. He paid attention. He saw my daughter as a person, not a problem to solve with technology." The interviewer pressed him. "But Mr. Lawson, are you not concerned about the message this sends, that credentials do not matter, that anyone can practice medicine without training?" Mark's response was sharp. "I am concerned about a system where a young woman suffers for 9 years because everyone is so committed to their expensive solutions that they cannot see the obvious flaw." Bernard did not practice medicine. He understood engineering, and he cared enough to try, when everyone else had given up. The interview was watched by millions. Then, Cindy spoke for herself. She posted a video from her own account, walking freely through her family's home, her voice calm and direct. For 9 years, I was told to accept my pain, to be grateful for devices that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, but did not actually work. Bernard Thompson gave me something no amount of money could buy: the ability to walk without suffering. If that makes you uncomfortable, if that challenges your assumptions about who is qualified to help, then maybe the problem is not Bernard. Maybe the problem is the system that failed me for nearly a decade. The credential debate intensified. Medical professionals argued about the balance between expertise and innovation, about whether Bernard's success was an outlier or evidence of systemic blindness. Some admitted that industries can become so entrenched in their methodologies that they miss simple solutions. Others doubled down, insisting that regulatory frameworks exist for good reason and that exceptions are dangerous. Bernard refused every interview request. He did not want fame. He did not want to become a symbol. He just wanted to keep his promise to Teresa and return to the quiet life he understood. But the attention would not leave him alone. Dr. Elaine Rutherford finally stepped forward. She published an article in a respected medical journal, carefully documenting what Bernard had accomplished and why it worked. She did not dismiss the importance of credentials, but she argued that the medical community needed to remain open to insights from unconventional sources. She ended with a proposal. Bernard Thompson's design should be tested under clinical supervision, refined where necessary, and if proven safe and effective, made available to others suffering from similar conditions. Her article shifted the conversation. Suddenly, it was not just about one janitor and one miracle. It was about whether the medical establishment could learn from its failures and adapt. Mark received a call from a medical device certification board. They wanted to discuss the possibility of formally testing Bernard's design under supervised conditions. If it passed, it could be manufactured and distributed. If it failed, at least they would know why. Mark looked at Bernard, who was standing in his office looking exhausted and overwhelmed. "The decision is yours," Mark said quietly. "You can walk away from all of this, or you can see it through." Bernard thought about Teresa, about Caleb, about the promise that had carried him through 8 years of grief. Then, he made his choice. The certification process took 6 months. Bernard worked alongside engineers and medical professionals in a clinical testing facility outside Houston, refining his design under supervision, documenting every modification, explaining the reasoning behind each choice. The experts were skeptical at first, protective of their methodologies, but as they studied Bernard's work, they began to understand what he had seen that they had missed. The design was unconventional, but it was sound. Dr. Rutherford oversaw the trials personally, ensuring that safety protocols were followed while also protecting Bernard from being dismissed or sidelined by professionals who resented his presence. She became his advocate, translating his intuitive understanding of mechanics into the technical language the medical community required. When the certification was finally approved, Mark Lawson made Bernard an offer. He would fund a small mobility workshop outside Fort Worth, a place where Bernard could continue his work, help others who had been failed by expensive systems, and operate with the legitimacy that credentials alone could never provide. Bernard accepted, not because he wanted recognition, but because the work mattered more than his pride. The workshop opened on a quiet morning in early autumn. It was a modest building, clean and functional, with equipment that Bernard had chosen himself. There was no grand ceremony, no media coverage, just a few people who needed help, and a man who finally had the space to provide it. Cindy visited on the first day. She walked through the door without assistance, without pain, her movements natural and confident. She found Bernard in the back workshop, assembling components for another brace, and stood watching him work for a moment before speaking. "I wanted you to see this," she said quietly. "I wanted you to see me walk the way I was always meant to." Bernard looked up, his hands stilling on the workbench. Seeing her like this, whole and free, was more than he had allowed himself to hope for. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like I got my life back," Cindy said, her voice steady but emotional. "You gave me that, Bernard. You gave me everything." Mark appeared in the doorway behind his daughter, and the two men looked at each other with an understanding that needed no words. Mark crossed the workshop and extended his hand, and when Bernard shook it, Mark pulled him into an embrace that spoke of gratitude too deep for language. "Thank you," Mark whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." Later that evening, after everyone had left, Bernard sat alone in the workshop holding a photograph of Teresa. It was old, creased at the edges, taken during their first year of marriage, when everything still felt possible. He spoke to her the way he had done countless times over the years, quietly, as if she could still hear him. "I kept my promise," he said. "I could not save you, but I helped someone else. I hope that is enough." The door opened softly, and Caleb stepped inside. He was 9 now, growing taller, but still small enough to fit perfectly under his father's arm. "Dad," Caleb asked, his voice gentle, "did you keep your promise?" Bernard looked at his son, at this boy, who had believed in him when no one else did, and nodded. "Yes, I did." Caleb smiled, the kind of smile that carried relief and pride in equal measure. "Mom would be proud." Bernard pulled his son close, feeling the weight of 8 years finally lifting from his shoulders. "I hope so." The final image was simple, almost ordinary. Cindy walking freely through a park near her home, her father beside her, both of them laughing at something only they understood. Bernard watching from a distance, not smiling but at peace, his hands resting in his pockets, his posture relaxed in a way it had not been in years. He did not need recognition. He did not need fame. He had kept his promise, and that was enough. Because miracles do not come from money, from prestige, or from systems designed to impress rather than heal. Miracles come from people who refuse to stop paying attention, who see what others overlook, who care enough to try, even when failure seems certain. Bernard Thompson was one of those people, and because of him, Cindy Lawson walked free. That was the miracle. That was everything.